Hello everyone, my name is Michelle Medrano, and for my topic of discussion, I wanted to dive into the concept of compliance gaining in police interrogation and in custodial interviews. So what I identified is that there are a variety of tactics exhausted by law enforcement during an interrogation that may lead to compliance gaining and persuasion of the civilian, which will allow for the police officers to perform an arrest. So that's pretty much their end goal, is to gather enough data from the suspect or witness which will warrant an arrest to take place. The tactics or techniques that I have identified are used in police interrogation are rewarding activity, punishing activity, suggestibility and probing questions, body language, the foot in the door technique, the fear and relief technique, and evoking freedom. So I recognize that rewarding activity may sound something like this. For example, a police officer might tell the suspect, "Hey, if you work with us and you tell us everything that took place in that incident, we will let you go." So this kind of treats freedom at stake as something that might be a reward for the individual if they comply and they work with the police officers, that, in exchange for their compliance, they will be rewarded by being let go. I recognized and I have highlighted in our textbook that it was called out by Cedar and Gass, page 237, that rewarding activity involves seeking compliance in an active and positive way, making promises. On the other side of the spectrum, punishing activity involves seeking compliance in an explicitly negative way, which is making threats. I have seen that law enforcement may exhaust different compliance gaining strategies such as rewarding and punishing activity, which may lead to making promises and threats to the individuals involved. So now I'm going to touch on punishing activity. So in the same scenario, police officers might use that same method. Instead of offering your freedom as a reward, it might be your punishment. "Hey, if you don't work with us, we can actually keep you here for longer, so you do need to answer the questions at hand." So now, instead of freedom being the reward in exchange for answering questions, now it's like threatened upon them that their freedom will be at stake. The next thing I wanted to touch on is suggestibility and probing questions, which can lead to the interviewee exposing themselves or may work in their benefit of the interviewee by implying their freedom of guilt. However, it's all dependent on how the respondent replies, alongside of their mannerisms and body language. So police officers pretty much are trained to structure their questions in such a way that may kind of lead to the information they want. They ask probing questions and they suggest answers because their end goal is to pretty much have enough detail that constitutes for them to detain the individual. So I feel that alongside of the suggestibility and probing questions, the police department team is also making an analyzation of how the person's body language is. So they're kind of looking for negative cues alongside with their replies, just to kind of see if there is validity in their statements, if it's believable based on, how they're sitting, if they're sweating, if their lips are pale, if there's like key cues that this individual may be lying. So I recognize in our textbook that Cedar and Gass noted specifically suspicious people tend to have shorter responses, take longer to answer, and manage their body movements more. So now there's like a sense of awareness that you're under a microscope and under the radar. And so with that being said, you're kind of like more cautious about how you sit, and you may be not natural about things. So those kind of things police officers are trained to evaluate while you're on the spot. I also wanted to talk about the foot in the door effect. In Cedar and Gass, it is noted that When you agree to comply with a small request, you see yourself as an altruistic person who is likely to help. And once you form that impression, you are motivated to behave in a manner consistent with this impression. Thus, when a larger request is made, you are more likely to comply. If law enforcement can bring down your guard on those involved in the alleged crime and gain compliance gaining on an initial request, the foot in the door method may be used when asking for a larger request. So what I identified, it might possibly be something along the lines where a cop says, hey, let me separate you two. An incident just happened. May I have you sit over here, and can you please sit over here? And now two different officers are involved in the situation, conducting questions with each individual suspect in separate locations. And so the initial request was to just sit separate from one another to diffuse things and separate them. They both agree. And so one is sitting on the curb, the other one is, by the police car or something. So the larger request is, now that they have agreed to separate from one another, the officer might say, hey, tell me what exactly happened. So the larger request is now getting more information, gathering data, which may lead to the arrest. I also wanted to talk about the fear and relief procedures. This is pretty much like where you instill fear in the individual. Maybe this is something where you come in super strong, you're making threats, you're loud, you're just consistent about pulling that data out of them, and there's a lot of aggression involved. And then it's kind of like where it's followed up with relief, where you kind of like soften your approach and you're more receptive and more understanding. So I feel like